Hi everybody, this is Fresh Astrology, and we're going to move further on with the topic of pain. And so I did a video, pain versus pleasure, pleasure versus pain, and you should go watch that, where I talk about it kind of on a lighter level, and I gave the example of how my Spanish classes in high school were more painful than my French classes in junior high, which I really liked, and how years later when I got off the plane in Costa Rica, all that came back to me was the French, which I had learned, many years before, and only had 2 years, whereas the Spanish I had had, 8 years of Spanish, and it was just very bizarre that I got off the plane and all I could think of was French. I think it had to do, the reason I use it as an example, I think it had to do with the fact that I really loved French more than I loved my Spanish class experience. I love the Spanish culture. I actually love the Spanish language. It was just the Spanish class that I didn't like. And the teaching style of the teacher was just not right for me. The actual room was physically uncomfortable. So it was unpleasant. And so that's just an example of how my brain wants to move toward French, because it was a better experience for me academically. So that's just a lighter example, but it's more complicated than that in real life. We don't always just run toward pleasure and away from pain. Sometimes we run toward pain for all the wrong reasons and end up hurting ourselves for all the wrong reasons. We know these times in our lives when we just shoot ourselves in the foot, we self-sabotage, we hurt ourselves. So there's that. And there are times we move away from pleasure because there's something painful about pleasure. We're complex beings, and that's why people go into psychotherapy. So it's just to say it's not always that simple. But what we're going to talk about today is clean pain versus dirty pain. And the biggest point is sometimes it's appropriate for us personally to maybe choose to walk through the fire. Not literally speaking, of course, but if you have to get out of a burning building, maybe you have to run through the fire, but to choose the pain to free yourself from a bad situation, or to do something that feels I'm trying to reach for the right word. Sometimes language is tricky on these complex topics. I don't want to insinuate that there's like an ultimate good and an ultimate bad, because there's so many gray areas. But sometimes the right decision is tough, and we know we're going to go through some pain to make the decision that feels right to us. So, first of all, clean pain versus dirty pain. Clean pain is when you hit your thumb with a hammer while you're trying to hang a picture. It's like, ouch. It's a real circumstance. It really does hurt your thumb, is responding with, feelings of pain. That's clean pain. Now, if after you do that, you think, I'm so stupid, I can't even hang a picture, I'm so uncoordinated, why can't I do such a simple task, blah, 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 that's dirty pain. That's when you start to heap onto the actual injury. You heap on more injury by telling all these negative stories in your head about it and obsessing on it beyond the event itself. That's dirty pain. So what I want to talk about is sometimes we choose the clean pain. Not that we would choose to hit our thumb with a hammer, but sometimes in life there are just times when we have to make a tough choice and we know it's going to hurt. So an example from my life has to do with one summer when there was going to be we could tell there was going to be a custody battle. I was divorced, I had 3 kids, still do, and 2 are much older, one's still in grade school, and at the time she was still quite young, and her dad, due to stuff that was happening to her at school with her schoolwork and her grades, was really kind of banging the drum of, I was hearing a lot of noise, in other words, that he was pushing for her to come live with him. He's putting a lot of pressure on her, in fact. And she had already had a crappy year and was kind of at a low point emotionally, and was not really didn't like the pressure. She wanted to stay where she was. It's not that she, was choosing a parent, one over the other. She just, wanted to stay in her school where she was and stay with her friends. And maybe didn't want to leave me, I don't know. But she didn't really want to go. But, the summer went on and I didn't know what to do, because I could tell that the thing that was looming was probably a big court battle, dealing with it legally. And I started to think about that and think about, what I wanted for my child, and, was deciding what my approach was going to be, what felt right. And I decided to focus only on what would be right for Nina. So I didn't let anything else enter the frame. I only considered what would be best for her. And so when I began to look at it that way and kind of construct, a list of pros and cons based on that alone, I could see that, given the circumstance of her father pushing for custody and the inevitability of him probably coming through with some, legal mechanism for doing that, knowing that once he did that, there would be this sense of animosity, of a battle that she would be in the middle of, and she would know it. And if I fought back legally, we would have to bring her, in my state, I knew the ramifications. She would have to come into a courtroom, stand there in front of a judge in a big scary courtroom and answer questions about her personal life, about, her mother and her father. And I knew that was going to be excruciating for her. And one thing I knew about child psychology that we learned, through the divorce, because we took the kids into counseling and talked to a child therapist, I knew that the research shows that a child does least well when parents are fighting, whether they're married or divorced. Children in a household or in a situation where the parents are always squabbling and there's animosity have the worst outcomes. And children who live in a situation where the parents aren't squabbling all the time, aren't fighting, have the best outcomes. So I knew that research, and I kept that in my mind as I went through this process for myself. And once I looked at that, I looked at the inevitability of where her dad was headed. And I'm not dissing him at all. He's, a good father and a good man. He's not at all, he was being forceful about that, but he's not abusive in any, I don't want to, imply that. And I knew that she would be going into a safe home. That he was a good father, and that, he's being forceful, he was being a little insensitive, but he would be a good father ultimately. Not perfect, none of us are perfect, but I knew that, and I believe in, kids getting to know their both parents equally well. So I was facing a really painful, agonizing decision to let my youngest child, a girl, go live away from me most of the time. I knew I would have full access to her. I could see her on weekends or after school or whatever, but she would not be living with me anymore. And as a mother, that's an extraordinarily painful decision to make. But when I just put together, took it out of my emotional wants and needs and desires and looked only at her, it was clear what I had to do. And so I had a conversation with her in which I said, if you really, really want to stay with me and you strongly want to stay, I will fight and do whatever I have to do to keep you here, but let me explain how that will work. It will go through a courtroom, and you will most likely have to go into the courtroom and talk to a judge, and it may be very unpleasant. It may be okay, but it may be very unpleasant. And I said, if you choose, if you do go live with your dad, I will be okay. And we will be okay. And once I framed it that way for her, it allowed her to not worry about hurting me. It gave her a different, I think she needed to know how I was looking at it. And it freed her up. And ultimately, I made a decision to agree with what her dad was wanting and let her go live there. Very tough decision. Very painful, but I chose to look at that pain, to figure out what felt right, most right, and walk straight into the pain, eyes wide open. And there are times in your life when you're gonna consider doing that, and there are times in life when that choice is before us to do that. And we run. We run. We don't want to look at it. We want to do the exact opposite of that because it just feels too painful, like we won't live through it. And I understand that pain. That's how it felt. But you do. It's okay sometimes to face the pain. And it could be a current painful situation. It could be a past painful situation. You can finally face something that you haven't been able to face, and choose to walk through the pain so you can free yourself from it, so you can get to something that's kind of a higher place, a cleaner place. Sometimes walking straight into the pain is a way toward freedom. And it's a very personal decision, moment by moment, as to what you choose to do. But this is the kind of thing that life coaching can really help with. I chose to get enormous support for myself when I was going through this, and life coaching definitely played a role. Martha Beck totally played a role in helping me figure out what was the right thing to do and how to get through such a difficult circumstance. So Martha Beck is, by the way, my kind of my mentor, and I am getting my certification through the Martha Beck Life Coaching Institute. And so in part, that experience is what led me toward life coaching, something I'm doing now. And I just want you to understand that one way life coaching can be really useful is getting through something really tricky like what I went through. By using the tools in life coaching, you can get rid of all the dirty thoughts, all the cloudy thoughts, the muddy thoughts that just swirl around and make it really difficult to make a decision, make it hard to face something maybe one needs to face to get out of the mental prison or the circumstantial prison. Life coaching can be very helpful. It's a set of tools that can start to clarify what needs to happen. And the process is all yours. It's not mine. As a life coach, I just sit there and give you the tools, and you find your way out of the box, but I hand you the tools at the right time. So if you need help, if you want to try life coaching, come work with me. You can go to my website, www.freshastrology.com, and feel free to email me if you're not sure if it's right for you, freshastrology@gmx.com, and have a great day.